Done.
Good evening. This is the Trouble at Home, the Mark Twain House Museum's bi-weekly interview on Twainian subjects, carrying on the tradition of The Trouble Begins at 5:30, the lecture series that we've been doing for 10 years now. I'm Steve Courtney. I'm the Curatorial Special Projects Coordinator here at the Mark Twain House, and virtually here. Of course, I'm at home right now. But in fact, the Mark Twain House is open under controlled and careful circumstances. You can go to marktwainhouse.org and you will learn all about it there. We are also involved in, well, there are two important buttons on your screen. If you look down below, you'll see one says, ask a question. That is, although you can see there's a chat over on the side, when you want to ask a question that will be reviewed at the end and hopefully answered, you have to click that little thing that says ask a question at the bottom. And then a very important part of it all is the little donation button, the turquoise button in the middle, which has a special aspect this week. It's with the Travelers Championship, we are getting 15% added to any donation under the Birdies for Charity program. So if you want to slip us a buck or $2 or $12, just press that button and we'll get 15% more than 12 if you can figure that out quickly in your head. We're very lucky tonight in our series to have Alan Rankin with us. Alan is a longtime a journalist and writer of all kinds, as he describes himself, from Fort Worth, Texas, who has a special interest, which he will be telling us about. I don't want to give too much away in the introduction, in Mark Twain's granddaughter. Now, Mark Twain never knew his granddaughter, Nina Gabrilowitsch. She was born a few months after he died in 1910. And the Mark Twain world knows about her, often about more about the very sad ending of her life than about the rest of it. And I think Alan will fill us in a little more on that, but I'd like to just really start him off to explain how, and this is somebody who came to Nina not from the Mark Twain world. And tell us that story, Alan.
Okay, so in the late 1980s, a friend of mine, Rudy Bowling, inherited several books from his grandmother after she passed away. One of those books in the box was a diary from the year 1924, kept by a girl named Nina Gabrilowitsch. Rudy had no idea who that was. His grandfather had been an attorney, in Los Angeles in the 1950s and 60s, had several celebrity clients, but this wasn't one that Rudy had ever heard of. But the diary itself was from 1924, as I said. She was 13 years old when she kept it, and Rudy started reading it just out of curiosity in the early 1990s. And then shared it with a couple of other friends, Jerry Smith and then myself. And we all had the same reaction of just getting this sort of window into a young woman's life. She wrote about her world very eloquently for her age and presented herself as the daughter of a symphony conductor in Detroit in the 1920s, kind of living the high life in the roaring 20s, traveling to Europe and going to a private girls' school. And so as we got more drawn into her life, I thought I'd look her up and just see if I could tell who she might have been. This was before the internet, and the odds of locating just some random girl from 70 years before seemed astronomical. But since she had such a distinctive last name, Gabrilowitsch, I thought there could be some reference to her father. And sure enough, I found a reference to Osip Gabrilowitsch when I looked in a biographical reference work. So that kind of blew my mind. And I didn't even notice any further details about the entry. I just made a photocopy of it and went on about my day. And only later, looking at it, did I realize that there was a reference to an S.L. Clemens, who was Osip Gabrilowitsch's father-in-law. S.L. Clemens, of course, being Mark Twain, and Osip, it turned out, was married to Clara Clemens, the only daughter to survive Mark Twain.
And how long did that process take? I mean, nowadays, of course, you can Google, as you said, you can Google something in seconds and probably find out the same information. But in those days, how long did it take?
So really, you would say days or hours. I mean, it took a while before I decided to go look her up and then found the name. But then after that, it was hours before I noticed the S.L. Clemens reference. And since the internet did not exist, I couldn't confirm that that was the same S.L. Clemens as Mark Twain. I had to actually wait till the next day when the library opened again.
Now, when you find a diary from 1924, the usual instinct is to look at the first few pages, not very interesting, put it down. What kind of attracted you about this diary in particular?
So again, it was the eloquence of the way that she wrote, and also the world that she created for us that was so completely different to our current world. For this occasion, I usually keep this under lock and key, but I got out the actual diary.
Wow.
Give me a second here. And so pretty much from the first days, she's right into describing her life. She had just, her parents had just bought a new house, what they were moving into in the 1st of January. So it was like a novel in that way, in that she sort of built her own world as we were reading along. And her parents were actually traveling on concert when the diary started, so we didn't even meet them until a week later. And of course, there was no actual reference to Mark Twain in the diary at all, except for as the author of some books she was reading, which is why we didn't tumble sooner to her actual identity. I was reading recently a book by Laura Scandera Trombley, the Mark Twain scholar, who has found evidence that Nina didn't know she was Mark Twain's granddaughter until she was in her teens, that Clara never told her.
Really?
And, yeah. I'm still trying to get more information about that, but it would explain why she never mentioned Mark Twain in the diary.
Which book is she reading?
She mentioned Roughing It and The Innocents Abroad, and she enjoyed them both.
She was very heavy going for a 14-year-old.
It's true. She was very well read for her age, and they were always reading books. She mentioned a lot of the books that she read was including The Three Musketeers and Rudyard Kipling. And so obviously Clara and Osip and her nanny kept her well read.
Now, I think when we spoke before, you said that not only you, but your friend who inherited the diary, and another friend, you almost all became fans of this.
Yeah. We all sort of felt a kinship to her, an emotional relationship like a younger sister or something, after we'd been reading for a while. And again, we were probably reading the book, the diary, for about 4 months before I ever thought to look her up. So we were well involved in her life by the time we actually found out her real identity.
And how old were you guys at that point?
We were about 25 years old.
25 years old. It's because it just seems like a wonderful kind of, I won't use the word obsession, but a kind of wonderful hobby.
Yeah, I've described it as a part-time obsession.
A part-time obsession, okay. That's good. And so would you read it aloud to each other or read passages and talk about them?
No, Jerry was actually the first one to sit down and read it. Rudy felt it was he was a little uneasy about kind of violating her privacy, even though he didn't know who she was. But then when Rudy saw Jerry's reaction, he also wanted to read it. And then when I overheard them talking about it later on, I was interested and asked to read the diary as well. So we all took turns reading it.
Well, I think we'd love to know sort of what this world was that she described, and maybe a little bit about it, and something that was exotic to you in 1992.
So I actually have a couple of excerpts. I had an actress record them for my presentation last year, and so I can play one of those for you if you like. And here, this is an actress reading Nina's words, and then also some photographs of Nina at the time. If you'd like to hear that.
We would love to.
Give me just a moment here.
Monday, June 16. I woke up at around 6 o'clock New York time, and looking out of the window beheld a picturesque sight. Right beside us flowed the broad Hudson, just as quiet as it could be, except when a swiftly passing motorboat left a path of ripples behind it on the pinkish blue water. Beyond were endless forests, where here and there were dotted small houses, and behind that the green curved hills. We had our breakfast on the train and arrived in New York Station at 10:24. I love the racket that goes on at any station. Conductors whistling, porters running, men calling, taxi doors banging, the noise of the engine, and a dozen other things.
So that's just a sample.
Well, even that small sample was, I mean, it was just entrancing, the rhythm of the sentences. You think it was something genetic from her grandpa?
That's always been our kind of assumption, is that even though she didn't maybe know at the time who he was, that there was certainly a literary bent to the family.
Yeah. Huh. And so it starts out, as you said, they're about to buy a new house. This is in Detroit, correct?
Correct.
Where Ossip was the conductor of the Detroit Symphony. But it does move on to Europe, correct?
Right. In the summer, they take a trip to Europe. Ossip has some concerts scheduled around the continent, and so they take a steamship to Europe in June, just after school lets out, and stay there almost until the first week of school in September. Traveling around.
Yeah. So what, and where was she going to school then? It would have been high school in Detroit, right?
Right. It was a private girls' school called Leggett School, which is still there, by the way, in Grosse Pointe. And often in the diary, she'll mention some famous figure of music at the time that'll come in for lunch, or because he's playing at the symphony orchestra, or she. And so I started looking those people up, and just kind of taught myself Nina scholarship and a little bit of Twain scholarship as I went along through the years. Obviously, it became easier once the internet happened. And in 2016, I went actually to the Hartford Museum, where I found that they had Nina's photo album from 1924. And
you mean our museum?
That's correct, yes, the Mark Twain House Museum. And I studied that archive for a week and found many photographs of her that corresponded with the diary pages that I'd been reading for years. And that first picture that you saw in the slideshow is actually from the Hartford archive, from that photo album. So that's what she looked like in 1924.
So at some point you decided to turn this into a book.
Yeah, very early on, actually. It seemed like it just cried out to be, especially because there hadn't been a book about Nina before. And it took me a long time to figure out exactly how to do that. I'm still working on the book now, but I think I've got a pretty good grip on what it's going to look like now. So
it's been a kind of an 18-year request, or
A little more than that, about 25 years, yeah.
25 years. Oh, yes, okay. And what kind of research have you been doing to develop the book?
So in addition to the Hartford Museum, I also traveled to the Mark Twain Papers in Berkeley. I visited Detroit Orchestra Hall, where her father performed. I also saw the house where she lived, Leggett School, and some of the material that the Detroit Library has in its archives, and researching pretty much everything I could find connected to Nina or the diary. One of the things that I learned was that Twain may have known Nina at least existed. According to Hamlin Hill, in the book God's Fool, Twain wrote a note to Clara on the day that he died that said, "Dear, you haven't told me, but I found out that you've become," and then the next word is either persuaded or personal, which might be his way of saying that he knew that Clara was pregnant.
Huh.
So it's a slim bit of evidence, but it does suggest the possibility.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. So, and so how far along is it? How soon could we expect this, do you think? You're looking for a publisher now, I think you told me.
Right, I'm looking for a publisher now. I was focusing on an academic version for a while, and I'd still like to do that. But at the moment, I'm focusing on a sort of popular edition for younger readers, or I should say young adult readers, readers Nina's age, basically.
Huh.
And so I'm working on that as we speak, pretty much.
Right. And you presented on this at the conference, the Mark Twain, the Samuel Clemens conference in Hannibal, correct?
Correct.
And also our good pals in Elmira, New York, where the Center for Mark Twain Studies is located, and has a fellowship program. Scholars are able to stay at the farmhouse where the Clemenses stayed when they were off for the summer from Hartford to Elmira, and Alan has been able to obtain one of these fellowships, which is really a great honor, because you have to convince those people that you're serious, right?
I'm amazed and very honored that I was chosen for that. I'm very looking forward to it. Hopefully it'll be in September if everything is sort of back to normal by then.
Yeah. It's, of course, everything is uncertain. Well, that's great too. And so what were sort of the more surprising things that you found? Is there something that really jumped out at you in the midst of this book, or?
So again, the recent information that maybe she didn't know who her grandfather was very surprising.
Right.
I guess it's interesting to me that the Mark Twain community, the scholarship community, always saw Nina as a tragic figure because of the way that her life went after the diary. Obviously, as you may know, she had problems with addiction and mental illness, and died of an overdose at age 55. And that is kind of the only information that many of the Mark Twain biographies had about Nina, when I could find information on her at all in the early days. And this was a real shock to us, not just because of the emotional bond that we sort of felt with Nina, but also because there's no indication. It's so completely in contrast with her personality in the diary. She's such a happy, chipper person and has nothing but loving words to say about her family and her world. So in recent years, I've taken to focusing on that as a way of presenting Nina in a book in such a way that it won't be a real, I guess, downer of a story, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Focus on her early years, her sort of golden years, I guess. We found out that she probably kept the 1924 diary separate from the other diaries that she kept. and that's why it wound up with Rudy's grandfather and not in an archive with the rest of the diaries. So I suspect that the 24 diary sort of represented a real watershed moment in her life. And maybe in later years, she would go back and look at it and sort of see when life was better. I don't know that for a fact. It's just a supposition that I've made based on what we know.
So the other diaries also exist.
The other diaries from 1925 through 1940, I think, are in an archive in Brigham Young University.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And the Twain Shall Meet, Susan Bailey's book, actually goes over those diaries in some detail.
Uh-huh. And you made a rather poignant pilgrimage that you describe in something that you posted on the Mark Twain Center's blog. Tell us a little about that.
It's true. So in 1999, I was able to visit Elmira, which is where the Clemens plot is. All of Nina's family is buried there, and Nina is as well. I discovered early in my research that actually the night before Nina died, she had said to a friend of hers, "When I die, I want artificial flowers, jitterbug music, and a bottle of vodka at my grave."
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that was her way of saying, of giving a verbal suicide note, or it just could have been a funny thing that she said to a friend before she left for the night. But either way, those are her last recorded words. So when I visited her grave in '99, I brought plastic flowers and a CD of swing music and a bottle of vodka and set them at her grave. And it was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. And it was more for the girl that she had been than the woman who said those words. But even so, I felt like I should honor her in that way.
Hmm. Well, that's. I mean, it ends up always being a sort of a sad story,
Unfortunately, yeah.
despite all of our attempts. But as with, of course, Clemens himself had tragedy in his life, and in the house we're always talking about a much happier era, and that can be quite a tension between, which is, I guess, something you're working on to resolve in your book, I'm sure, to accentuate the positives, as they say, without denying the fact that there was tragedy there, and addiction was a terrible thing. And back in that period, there were not the resources available to people now. It was kind of treated as something to hide under the carpet, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the reasons the book took me so long is because I've been trying to find that balance between her tragic later life and the early years. And
yeah. Now, your friend, the actress who did the very brief readings we heard from the diary, are those? Is she a friend, or is she somebody you have known or worked with?
Yeah, someone I work with actually introduced me to her, and she turned out to be great. She really did a really good job on those. I've got another I can play if you want to hear that.
I would love to hear more of the diary.
Okay, give me a second here.
Friday, September 26th. At 6 minutes to 10, the wonderful Zeppelin that is to fly to America appeared. Crowds of people filled the streets, and many were stationed on the roofs of buildings supplied with moving picture cameras. The silver-gray Zeppelin glided gracefully along, so gracefully that it seemed a mere phantom of the air. 4 times we saw it, and each time the spectators cheered and waved their handkerchiefs. In the afternoon, Fräulein and I shopped, and at 7:15 left for Father's second and last concert. At first, I also sat in a Landecker box, but later, as more and more people came, I joined Fräulein and Uncle George, who sat below. Father's playing was marvelous, and so was his directing, but it must have been an awful strain because his visage was as white as snow. After the last piece, he was called out 6 times. The populace were begeistered. Who do you suppose were there? Dr. Haas, Mrs. Haas, and Herr Helmut Gorina. Imagine. Fräulein and I walked home. I got to bed at 10:30.
Well, that's a wonderful chatty entry, the kind you might expect, less descriptive, but and more informational. Just well, here's what happened, and then this happened next, and Father was great, and all that kind of thing. Very lovely, yeah.
It shows her relationship with her father and his music, which she loved, and also mentions Fraulein, also known as Mademoiselle in some pages, who was her nanny and kind of her constant companion that year. She was sort of the woman raising Nina when her parents were off on concert tours.
And they were in Berlin at that time.
Yes.
Where they saw this Zeppelin. And of course, this is long before the Hindenburg, so it was not anything to do with that. This is in 1924.
Right, and I did some research on that. It turns out that there are fans of airships, like there are fans of Twain, who've researched every detail they can find. And I found one of those who was able to confirm for me that photograph that we saw was actually the Zeppelin she saw. It was the only time that Zeppelin was over Berlin, was on that date that she recorded in her diary. So I was able to establish that that photograph was taken on the same day as she mentioned, September 24th.
Oh, right. So you are a pursuer of details. So what I know you do write a column for a magazine, and you do other kinds of writing. Tell us about those things.
Right. So I've been a writer pretty much all my life. My focus has shifted depending on what I need to do, and I'm also self-taught on a lot of things, like Mark Twain and Nina scholarship, for example. Currently, I create content for a website online, is my paying job. And then also I have this column that I do researching figures of the Renaissance Fair circuit and their history.
So is that something you're involved in, Renaissance fairs?
That's correct, yes.
Oh, how interesting. Do you dress up and do all that stuff?
I do as well, yes.
Yes, we have people on our staff who are involved in similar things, of course, and plus our living history people who are, doing this professionally to teach people about the life in the house.
Right, and I've actually traveled around to different Renaissance fairs while working, and that's also given me the opportunity to go and visit some of these other sites, like Elmira.
So you are a Renaissance man.
Indeed, literally.
Literally, yeah. Well, one interesting thing about the Mark Twain community, people interested in him, is that it runs the gamut from people with 12 degrees, right down the line to people like you and me who are more independent scholars, who come at this stuff because we're interested in something grabs us about this, the atmosphere around this man. Or in your case, the after story, the what happened to the family, and I get the now. Clara was a musician too. She was a concert singer, and she sang, in fact, some early benefits for the Mark Twain House when it was first getting started simply as a library, and in 1929 and 30. She and Ossip came to Hartford to perform. I've never found a recording of her voice, and people in the collecting world have told me they haven't found one either.
I was curious about that too.
Beg your pardon?
I was curious about that as well. I have found some recordings of Ossip performing with the symphony orchestra, but no, I've never come across any recordings of Clara or Nina for that matter.
Too bad. And Nina also, did she also take voice lessons? It was at all?
She was interested in acting, actually. She pursued, studied acting somewhat and did a few plays, but about the time her career might have started taking off, she started to get into alcohol and drugs.
Yeah. So it comes back to the story, sadly, always comes back to that, as we said, yeah. But, well, that's really, I mean, what a wonderful sort of quest to brighten up this story. And I presumably you've been to Brigham Young and you've been able to put this one diary into the context of the surrounding years. And
not yet. Brigham Young is one of my next trips to take.
Okay. Yes. Well, very good. That'll sort of be you'll be able to put your piece of the dinosaur bone into the dinosaur.
Exactly.
That's a terrible analogy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a wonderful story, and I really wish you luck and in your work at Quarry Farm. And we will take questions, I guess, in a moment. I will talk very briefly about the next one of these, which is on July 9th, and that's Dr. K. Patrick Ober, who's this wonderful physician and professor of medicine, who wrote the definitive book about Mark Twain and medicine. I mean, one thing that we learn that people are always interested in at the Mark Twain House is sort of the health of everybody involved, and their aches and pains and their serious illnesses and their light illnesses. It's appropriate for him to talk about epidemics, which of course were a lot less controllable in his era than they are today. So, not only did he credit a measles epidemic in the Mississippi Valley for getting him started as a writer, he also it involved some adaptation of the Hartford House to, and that's again Pat Ober, July 9th, same time, 5:30. But maybe we will move on to questions, because I would guess people have a lot of them. So Jennifer, are you there?
I am indeed. Hi.
There you are once more.
Oh my goodness, it was fascinating. And I can tell from the chat that I'm not alone in thinking it was fascinating. So thank you so much, Alan and Steve. As usual, our participants have a lot of really excellent questions. So I'm going to launch right in. Do you know how the other this is Dave Sherman asking, do you know how the other diaries got to Brigham Young? What's the story there?
So we're actually not really sure. They were donated by a woman, I think, by the name of Hazel Poulter, if I remember right. But we're not sure what connection that she had to Nina or how she wound up with the other diaries.
Huh. Fascinating. Carol, who's one of our volunteers, hi Carol, wants to know, is there any mention of Nina as playing a musical instrument? Do we know whether she was musical herself?
So she was required to take piano lessons in the 1924 diary, mentioned several times how frustrated her piano teacher got with her. She clearly was expected to have some talent because of her father, but apparently did not.
Oh dear. I think it's also Carol who wanted to know, did Nina go to college? And if so, do you know what she majored in?
She went to Barnard, and I want to say she studied drama. I'd have to check on that.
Okay. So this one's from me, because I noticed a little bit of difference in how you pronounce the last name versus how Steve pronounces the last name. So can you each say your version of how you think that last name is pronounced, and then talk about why, or how? Let's duke this out and solve it.
I would bow to Alan on this, because I have a feeling he knows more than I do about this. I've always called the family name Gabrilowitsch.
I'm glad you brought this up, actually, because I meant to mention this at some point. So I don't know how Nina pronounced it, but when her father was asked how to pronounce it, he would say accent on the love, which is an easy way to remember it. So,
Oh,
Gabrilowitsch.
Gabrilowitsch.
And
Gabrilowitsch.
then,
Actually, that sounds more authentically Russian, or he was sort of Rus Polish.
he was Russian, but lived a lot in Germany. So it could also be a German pronunciation. I'm not sure.
oh, that's awesome. I think a lot of us are going to carry that ball forward with
Yeah,
us.
we're going to have to reform all of our pronunciation at the Mark Twain House from now on.
Gabrilowitsch.
The great
Okay.
stuff. This might be more for Steve than for Alan, but given what we've seen now about Nina's interesting writing skills, do we know whether Clara was an okay writer? Do we have any written record of her? Oh, Alan, you just made an interesting face. Tell us what you know.
I'll defer to Alan on this. We do, in fact, have, I believe, a novel or so that she wrote. She's certainly published a book that Alan, I think, also knows more about than I do. So I'll pass that one on to Alan, too.
So she wrote several books. One of them was about Ossip. And so I read that as part of my research. And let's just say that she didn't really inherit her dad's writing skills. And again, I'll defer to the Twain experts who may have read more of her work. Maybe she's got better writing. But it seems
there is one that it's one of our standard sources at the Mark Twain House, and it's so kind of ubiquitous that I forgot to mention it. She wrote a book about her father, My Father, Mark Twain, in the 1930s. And it's a source of many of the stories that we tell in the house, how they celebrated Christmas, anecdotes that we refer to in our various tours, both living history tours and our regular tours. And my impression of her writing is that it's sort of sprightly and lively, certainly. She did take the liberty to print. I think she would maybe get a little tired of writing and print entire letters that she had from her father or her mother, or one very good. I mean, we're very lucky. One letter from George Griffin is in there, the butler who was such an important part of the household. But it's not super cohesive, but it's got great stories in it about where in the house she kept her pet squirrels, and what she and Susie would do for fun, and where they would hide on the staircase at night and watch the dinner parties. You can actually go probably to the almost exact stair these days and reenact that if you want. Anyway, it's full of great detail like that. Not great literature, but it's certainly highly, it's very educated writing and very cohesive and good stuff.
And Clara, of course, was very helpful in annotating a floor plan that guided the restoration of the house and all of that, right?
Yes, the restorers it wasn't until the 50s that they really started thinking about restoring the house as a historic house museum in the way that it is today. Before that, it had been a branch of the public library with apartments upstairs, but the main, the house, the main part of the house, the main structure of the house was intact. And in the late 50s, the early restorers, who were tremendous researchers, they just researched everything to the hilt, wrote to send a plan of the house to Clara in California. And she marked it up, here's where I kept my squirrels, here's where my father had his desk, what color the drapes were in the rooms where she could remember things like that. Actually, Alan, this is always an interesting story to me. How did she end up in California, Clara?
How did Clara want?
And Nina did end up in California too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So she married, after Ossip died, she married another conductor, Jacques Samosad. And right around then, I want to say she packed up the Detroit house and moved to California. Maybe I'm getting the order on that wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
Huh.
And Nina,
So-
correct?
Nina went to
followed them.
Yeah, Nina went to California in the 30s as well to work on her acting career, and actually got a nose job to accentuate her acting. And there was some talk of her working in movies, but again, that kind of petered out after a while. I do have a picture here of Nina after her nose job.
Oh yeah, let's see.
You can see that here.
Oh my goodness. Huh.
Good job. So, Alan, I don't want to belabor this, but a number of people have asked questions about Nina's awareness of or interaction with her grandfather's legacy and any of the sites, the childhood home, or the boyhood home, I should say. Do we know whether she appreciated and cared about any of that, or?
So she did take part in some of that. In the 1930s, she was part of the dedication of the Mark Twain Zephyr, a train engine that was named after Mark Twain, and actually broke a champagne bottle across its nose, like a christening of a boat. And later on in life, she talked a lot about her connection to grandfather. She started calling herself Nina Clemens Gabrilowitsch, and sometimes just Nina Clemens. This was after her father died. Sometimes she would joke that she couldn't pronounce Gabrilowitsch. So that was why she adopted the name Clemens. But later on in life, she definitely tried to reinforce her connection with her grandfather in people's minds.
I think in 1935, there was a lot of activity around Mark Twain's centennial, because he was born in 1835. And I know she was invited to an event in Hartford that was celebrating that, but I think she didn't make it, as I recall reading in one of the old scrapbooks. But that would have been a time when she would have been called upon.
Mm-hmm.
So a number of people have asked if you can show a few more pages from the diary, and also, are there any sketches, or is it all just written words?
This is all just written words. She did do sketches as well, but there aren't any in the diary, unfortunately, in this diary.
And this diary was an actual, you showed us the first page, the kind of title page. This was a commercially produced blank book that was meant as a diary. So this would have been a common thing at the time?
Yeah, and imagine so. So it's actually pre-printed for 1924, and the actual pages are all pre-printed as well with the date.
Okay. Oh, wow. Look at that.
You get one page per day, and she would just fill in the page as thoroughly as she could, generally. Although she did skip some pages, and there's a few pages that were removed, and skipped the entire last 3 months. She stopped in October, and we're not sure why, and didn't resume her diary until sometime in 1925.
Well, tell us about the pages that were removed. Is there any indication of the before and after entries? To why?
Yeah. So we found out later that she had a habit of removing pages from her diaries and maybe even destroying whole diaries if they had something that she considered improper or scandalous. In the case of the missing pages from the 1924 diary, how shall I put this delicately? She was approaching puberty and was very excited about the advent of puberty in her life. And then later on, she's talking about how much of a pain it is. So it seems like that was the advent of puberty for her, those 4 days or so in April that were removed from the diary. And whatever she wrote about that, she didn't want people to read later.
That's fascinating. Wow. Gosh. Are you willing to take a few more questions? People are still asking.
Absolutely.
So let's Let me see. I got so wrapped up in your answer that I didn't remember that I'm supposed to be checking the questions. Let's see. Somebody who I can't identify says, I have several recordings of Nina's voice. Would you like to have copies?
Yes.
Huh. Yes. Did you hear that, person who has? So there are, I'm going to be honest, there are some questions here wanting to focus a little bit on the roots of Nina's addiction and whether she and Clara got along well and whether she felt, well treated by her mother. Is that anything that you want to talk about at all this evening?
It's a question that's kind of perplexed me over the years because, again, in the diary, any reference to her mother is made very lovingly. And in later years, there's a quote that's appeared several times in various references where I think a psychiatrist said that Nina's hatred of her mother is well established. And so I'm very curious as to how that transition from one state to the other came over a period of 30 or 40 years. I know that Clara was very domineering personality, I think is safe to say, and was also very protective of Mark Twain's reputation and not wanting anything to sully that reputation. So the addiction and alcoholism may have been a point of contention for them. That's just a guess.
Well, I think it's a pretty good guess because there was quite a lot of legal hassle at the end of her and Clara's life. I mean, Clara died really only 4 years before she did, and had rather pointedly disinherited her in the late 50s, saying that I've given you enough. I've given you a trust fund all these years. If I give you more money, you'll just spend it on liquor. And there's quite a. I know the Mark Twain Journal isn't something you're going to find in your local newsstand, but it's if you Google it, if you get a copy of the current spring issue, there's an excellent long article on paper really by Henry Cohn, a Superior Court judge in New Britain, Connecticut, who's a great Mark Twain scholar in his own right. It's all about the issue of Mark Twain's will and all the legal machinations that went on at the time, including Nina and her challenges to her mother's will, for which I guess your friend's great-grandfather, was the attorney, right?
I was just about to mention that. Yes, Al Matthews helped her contest Clara's will and actually get, I think, a third of the Twain estate, if I remember right. Eventually, she won that. Although, again, as Clara said, the money probably didn't do her any good.
Right. And there is a co-author on that paper whose name I can't remember, but I apologize to him. But Henry Cohn is just a wonderful, has a tremendous interest in Mark Twain, comes to all of our Twain lectures.
Yeah. He's a great member of the Mark Twain House family. So Sherry in our audience wants to know, Alan, do you have a favorite page in this diary? Is there one that you remember as your favorite? And if so, can you share it with us?
So, let's see. I do like the page where she sees the Zeppelin, because that was an early sort of point where I could connect her with history, recorded history, outside of Nina or Twain scholarship. And so it was really exciting to me to be able to pinpoint the exact vessel and the exact day and be able to look up things about that airship later on, in its existence. It actually flew over Detroit in the 30s at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yes, by coincidence.
Do you like Nina?
Yeah, sure. Like I say, we sort of felt a kinship to her, and we still do. And I'm hoping that I can convey that kinship in my book so that others will connect with her in the same way.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to seeing that book, and obviously, if the Mark Twain House and Museum can be of any use to you, and in finishing that up, that we are there. Steve, do you have more that you want to chat about with Alan?
No, not at all. I mean, as you say, I think this is a marvelous example of how scholarship just grows out of a chance encounter or discovery that has really, given you, as you said, a 25-year project, and one that is completely fascinating.
Thank
But
you.
other than that, I just want to thank you for being here, Alan, and and we're eager to hear what happens next and how your fellowship works out at Quarry Farm, and we are and we're continuing these. As I said, the next one is a sort of a medical interview in 2 weeks from today, and I guess that will about wrap it up. Correct, Jennifer?
I think so. What a wonderful evening, and thank you so much. I think we've all learned even more than we expected to, and we feel we know Nina a little bit better through your work, Alan. So thank you.
Thank you.
For coming. If anyone donated, I don't know anything about that yet, but we thank you for that, for the Birdies for Charity, and there we are. Thanks so much for coming, all of you. Good
Thanks,
night.
Alan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.